As midnight struck, the old church in the small, secluded village of Ravenwood stood in eerie silence. Its once proud stone walls now seemed to shiver under the weight of an unspoken horror. The townspeople had long abandoned their nightly visits, leaving the church a dark, forgotten relic. Father Jonathan, the only one who dared stay after dusk, had felt the change for months. Strange whispers echoed through the halls, faint footsteps seemed to follow him, and flickering candle flames often formed ghastly shadows on the ancient walls. But tonight was different. A cold draft blew through the nave, extinguishing every candle in an instant. The darkness was suffocating. Suddenly, the bells began to toll on their own, their mournful clangs filling the air with an oppressive dread. Father Jonathan gripped his cross, his hand trembling, as he moved toward the altar. As he drew closer, he noticed something written on the floor in red, as though scrawled hastily with a trembling hand: "Leave now, or join the damned." A low growl reverberated from the shadows, and an unearthly figure began to materialize, its face twisted in agony. Frozen in fear, Father Jonathan dropped to his knees, whispering a prayer. But his voice was drowned by the tortured cries now filling the church, each echo a ghostly plea for salvation. With one final scream, the figure lunged forward, dragging Father Jonathan into the darkness. The church doors swung shut, trapping every sound within. No one in the village saw the priest again, and from that night onward, the church remained silent, yet forever haunted. Weeks passed, and the absence of Father Jonathan cast a heavy gloom over the village. People avoided the church altogether, even during the day, fearing the presence that lingered within its stone walls. The once faithful community now whispered of curses and demons, of spirits forever trapped in the church's darkened halls. One evening, a young woman named Eleanor arrived in the village. She had heard rumors of the haunted church and the disappearance of the priest, but unlike the villagers, she wasn't frightened. Eleanor had a history of seeking out the paranormal, claiming to have witnessed things that most would only dream of or rather, have nightmares about. Driven by curiosity and courage, she decided to enter the church. As she stepped through the doors, the air turned thick, and an unnatural chill crept over her skin. Dust covered the pews, and the scent of candle wax hung in the air, mingled with something far more unpleasant and old, stale decay that seemed to radiate from the walls. Despite this, Eleanor pressed forward, her flashlight casting eerie shadows that twisted and moved as though alive. Near the altar, she spotted something: Father Jonathan's cross, lying on the ground. It was charred black, as if scorched by an invisible flame. Kneeling to pick it up, she felt a sudden surge of energy, like static, and a low, ominous whisper echoed in her ear: "Why did you come here?" Eleanor spun around, but no one was there. Gathering her nerves, she whispered, "I'm here to understand what happened. I want to help you if you're trapped." Her words echoed, swallowed by the silence. But then, a faint light appeared at the end of the aisle. It was dim and flickering, like a candle, but with a sickly green hue. As Eleanor moved closer, she could see the faint shape of Father Jonathan. His face was pale and hollow, his eyes wide with terror, but his expression seemed frozen, as if he was trapped in an endless moment of horror. Before she could reach him, his figure vanished, and a new, darker shape took his place. This figure was taller, cloaked in shadows with eyes that glowed red. It extended a skeletal hand toward her, whispering in a voice that seemed to come from all directions at once, "You should have never come here, Eleanor. Now you will join us." Eleanor tried to turn and run, but her legs felt as if they were sinking into the ground, held by an unseen force. Her vision blurred, and the air grew colder, her breath visible as it left her in shaky gasps. In a final desperate act, she held up Father Jonathan's cross, hoping its power might save her. The shadow figure recoiled slightly, hissing, but then laughed a low, guttural sound that echoed off the stone walls. "That symbol is powerless here," it sneered, stepping closer. Eleanor's grip weakened, and she felt herself falling, her consciousness slipping as the church faded around her. When the villagers came to check on her the next morning, They found the church empty, except for Eleanor's flashlight lying cold on the floor. Her face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, her eyes wide open but empty of life, staring endlessly at something only she could see. From that night on, the church was sealed. But even then, at midnight, villagers would hear faint cries and whispers carried by the wind, reminding them that whatever haunted the church was not yet finished claiming Years
souls.
went by, and the haunted church in Ravenwood became a dark legend, its story spreading far beyond the village. Despite warnings, it occasionally attracted thrill-seekers and ghost hunters who wanted to witness its horrors firsthand. Few dared enter, and those who did often fled in terror, speaking of voices, shadows, and icy touches that lingered long after they had left. But one night, a team of paranormal investigators from a well-known TV show arrived, determined to capture evidence of the supernatural. They were confident, armed with cameras, EVP recorders, and equipment meant to detect spirits. The team leader, Jacob, was convinced that they would finally uncover the secrets of the haunted church. As they set up inside, the church was silent, almost welcoming in its stillness. They conducted initial scans and found nothing unusual. But just as they were about to dismiss the night as a failure, the air shifted, growing dense and cold. Their equipment flickered, and a deep, rumbling sound began to echo from the back of the church. A chill ran down Jacob's spine as he felt an intense, unseen presence fill the room. "If there's anyone here, make yourself known," he called out, holding his recorder. The silence thickened, and then, slowly, a voice crackled through their headphones. "Leave or suffer." The team exchanged uneasy glances, but their curiosity overpowered their fear. They pressed forward, following the sounds deeper into the shadows near the altar, where Eleanor's flashlight still lay on the floor, untouched after all those years. Suddenly, a shadowy figure began to take shape near the altar. It was Eleanor, what remained of her. Her face was pale and twisted in fear, her eyes hollow and distant. She reached out toward Jacob, her hand trembling, as if warning him. But before she could speak, her form was pulled back violently, disappearing into the darkness, as if by an invisible force. The investigators froze as a new presence filled the air, a monstrous, towering shadow with those same red, glowing eyes. It advanced toward them, silent yet filled with malice. The cameras caught a glimpse of its twisted face, ancient and tormented, before they cut to static. Panic surged through the team as they stumbled back toward the entrance. But as they tried to escape, they found the doors locked tight, held by an unseen force. Jacob pounded on the doors, screaming, but his voice was drowned out by the deafening toll of the bells overhead, ringing on their own in a terrible, discordant melody. One by one, the team members vanished into the shadows, dragged away by ghostly hands that emerged from the walls, pulling them into the dark. Only Jacob remained, his back pressed against the altar, clutching a rosary head found on the floor. The shadow figure loomed over him, whispering, "You sought the truth. Now you will be part of it." With a final scream, Jacob was pulled into the shadows, his voice swallowed by the church's ancient curse. By morning, the church was silent once more, the only trace of the team being their abandoned equipment scattered on the cold stone floor. The villagers heard of their disappearance, but no one dared to investigate. The church was finally sealed off entirely, left as a grim monument to the spirits that lingered within. And yet, those who pass by at night claim they can still hear the faint echoes of voices, the distant tolling of bells, and the haunting whispers of those lost souls, forever trapped in the church's dark embrace. Months passed since the disappearance of the paranormal team, and Ravenwood grew eerily quiet. But rumors continued to spread, and whispers of the haunted church's horrors reached a nearby city. Intrigued by the mystery, a professor of folklore and paranormal studies named Dr. Amelia Harper decided to investigate. She specialized in uncovering the truth behind local legends, and this story was too compelling to ignore. Amelia arrived at the church one crisp autumn evening, her nerves steady but her heart racing with anticipation. Armed with nothing but a notebook, a flashlight, and an antique silver cross she'd inherited from her grandmother, She hoped to uncover what had happened to those who had vanished as she stepped into the abandoned church. A wave of cold washed over her. The air smelled of damp stone and decay, and her footsteps echoed through the empty, shadowed aisles. The silence was oppressive, thick, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Amelia moved cautiously toward the altar, where an odd assortment of objects lay scattered: a camera with cracked lenses, a flashlight, and, to her horror, a notebook with the name Jacob scratched into its cover. Her fingers trembled as she flipped it open, seeing frantic notes, desperate scribbles of warnings: do not speak to it. The red-eyed shadow, it knows your fears. A sudden creak echoed behind her, and she whirled around, her flashlight catching a fleeting glimpse of momentous figure in the shadows. She felt her heart quicken but stood her ground, whispering, "I'm not here to harm you. If you can hear me, show yourself." The air shifted, growing colder, and a faint, ghostly figure appeared. It was Eleanor, her hollow eyes brimming with silent pleading. Her mouth moved soundlessly, but Amelia could sense the warning leave. Before Amelia could respond, the church was plunged into darkness. Her flashlight flickered, and suddenly, the tolling of the bells began, slow, ominous, each chime resonating like a heartbeat in the silence. Shadows gathered around her, forming twisted faces and hands reaching out from the walls. Amelia gripped the silver cross, raising it defiantly. "I know your story. I know what you suffered. You don't have to be trapped here anymore," she shouted into the darkness. The shadow screeched, its form twisting and contorting as the spirits of Eleanor and Father Jonathan pushed it back. With a final, agonized howl, the shadow burst apart, dissolving into the light. The bells ceased, and the church grew still. When Amelia opened her eyes, the spirits of Eleanor and Father Jonathan looked at her with gratitude before fading, finally at peace. She was alone once more, standing in the quiet church, her breath steady as dawn's light crept through the windows. From that day forward, the church was no longer feared. The village restored it, and it became a place of light rather than darkness. And while some say that Amelia still returns on occasion, to leave flowers by the altar in memory of those lost souls, the haunting whispers finally faded, leaving only a peaceful silence behind.